Chapter 20, Part 2 of Social Statics by Herbert Spencer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Social statics, or the conditions essential to human happiness specified, and the first of them developed, by Herbert Spencer. The Constitution of the State, Part 2. 8. When it is urged that the working classes ought not to be admitted within the pale of the Constitution because they are ignorant, it is tacitly assumed that the existing electors are enlightened, and quietly making this assumption, the opponents of popular enfranchisement argue at their ease that it would be extremely impolitic to swamp intelligent 10-pound householders, freeholders, and tenants at will by letting in upon them the masses lying in outer darkness. Painful as it may be, the pleasing illusion that our present constituency is thus honorably distinguished must be dispelled. If by ignorance is meant want of information on matters which, for the due performance of his function, the citizen should understand, and no other definition is to the point, then it is a great error to suppose that ignorance is peculiar to the unenfranchised. Were there no other illustrations, sufficient proof that this ignorance is shared by those on the register might be gathered from their conduct at elections. Much might be inferred from the tuft-hunting spirit exhibited in the choice of aristocratic representatives. It might be asked whether those are intelligent voters whose ears are tickled by the euphony of a title, whose eyes are attracted by heraldic emblazonry, or whose votes are determined by the acreage of a candidate's estates. Some doubts might be cast on the penetration of men who, whilst they complain of the pressure of taxation, send to Parliament hordes of military and naval officers who have an interest in making that taxation still greater. Or the pretensions of the present monopolists of political power might be tested by quotations from the debates of a farmer's market ordinary and from those of the assembly into which electoral wisdom is distilled. But without dilating upon these general considerations, let us examine a few of the opinions entertained by the mercantile classes upon state questions, and see how far these opinions entitle them to a reputation for enlightenment. Money is wealth was the dogma universally held by legislators and economists before the days of Adam Smith as a self-evident truth, and in conformity with the acts of the Parliament were by general consent framed to attract and retain in the country as much coin as possible. Mr. Mill, in the introduction to his recent elaborate work, assumes that this belief is now extinct. It may be so amongst philosophers, but it is still prevalent in the trading world. We continue to hear acts praised as tending to circulate money, and on analyzing the alarm periodically raised that the money is going out of the country, we find such an occurrence regarded as a disaster in itself, and not simply as indicating that the country is poor in some essential commodity. Is there not occasion for a little enlightenment here? Again, no small number of respectable people, seeing that increased consumption always accompanies prosperity, infer that consumption is in itself beneficial, is the cause of prosperity instead of its collateral effect, and hence on witnessing a fire or the mad extravagance of some spendthrift, they console themselves with the reflection that such things are good for trade. Dangerous voters these, if sound political knowledge is a needful qualification. Similarly diffused amongst the middle ranks is a notion that the withdrawal of a large part of the funds of the community by the non-producing classes is no real detriment to the rest. For that, as the money thus abstracted is subsequently spent amongst the rest, it eventually comes to the same thing, as though it had not been abstracted at all. Even a professed political economist, Dr. Chalmers, maintains that the revenues of landowners form no deduction from the means of society, seeing that the expenditure of such revenues consists in a transference to the industrious of sustenance and support for their services. Which proposition amounts to this, that it matters not in the end whether A and his servants B, C, and D live on the produce of their own industry or on the produce of other men's industry. Another mistake current alike amongst rich and poor is that the speculations of corn dealers are injurious to the public. So indignant are many well-meaning men at what they conceive to be a practice of intolerable cruelty, that it is scarcely possible to make them see how perfect freedom of trade is nationally advantageous in this as in all other cases. Their anger blinds them to the fact that were not the price raised immediately after a deficient harvest by the purchases of these large factors, there would be nothing to prevent the people from consuming food at their ordinary rate, which would end in the inadequate supply being eaten up long before the ripening of the next crop. They do not perceive that this mercantile operation is analogous in its effect to putting the crew of a vessel on diminished rations when the stock of provisions is found insufficient to last out the voyage. A somewhat serious error this for electors to labor under, especially as many of them would prevent the buying up of corn by legal penalties. What crude theories prevail also respecting the power of a legislature to encourage different branches of industry, agricultural interests, and other interests? It is not farmers only who labor under the mistake that their occupation can be made permanently more prosperous than the rest by act of Parliament. Educated townspeople, too, participate in the delusion, quite forgetting that the greater profitableness artificially given to any particular trade inevitably draws into that trade such an increased number of competitors as quickly to reduce its proffered advantages to the general level, and even for a time below that level. Is not the educator wanted behind the counter and on the farm, as well as in the workshop? Note again the wild ideas entertained on currency questions. We smile at the simplicity which in times past led a famine-pinched populace to ascribe the high price of bread to the covetousness of bakers and millers. Yet there is no little analogy between such a theory and that which attributes national distress to bad monetary arrangements. Just as the poor man, when made to feel the scarcity of food by having to pay double the usual sum for a loaf, straightway taxed the seller of the loaf with the evil, so do many traders to whom commercial depression comes in the shape of a difficulty in getting advances from their bankers or cash for their bills of exchange, conclude that the circulating medium is in fault. Being ignorant, like their hungry prototypes, that the primary cause of the mischief is a deficiency in the national stock of food or other commodities. To suppose that a state of general privation can be cured by the issue of banknotes is to err with the projector of perpetual motion who hopes to make power out of nothing. Thus the tu quoque argument, which we found so completely to neutralize the inference drawn from the alleged immorality of the laboring classes, is a not much less cogent answer to the objection urged against the extension of the suffrage on the ground of popular ignorance. If, because they are deficient in information, the people should continue unenfranchised, then for a like reason should the existing electoral body be disfranchised. If the two classes are to have their relative degrees of competence to wield political power determined by comparing the amounts of their knowledge, their political knowledge, mind, then the advantage on the side of the present holders of such power is quite insufficient to give them an exclusive claim to it. As we have just seen, a great proportion of them are in error on the most important public questions, on the nature of wealth, on what things are good for trade, on the relationship of producers and non-producers, on dealings in the people's food, on the encouragement of trade, on the influences of currency, and so forth. Where then is their great superiority over the non-electors? Have many artisans mistaken excessive competition for the cause of an evil instead of taking it for what it is, the symptom of one? Why, they are countenanced in this error by not a few of the educated. Do working men hold wrong opinions concerning machinery? So likewise do nearly all the farmers and no small number of tradesmen. Is the false impression that manufacturers can raise or lower wages at will prevalent amongst the masses? It is widely entertained too by their richer neighbors. How then can the ignorance of the people be urged as a reason for refusing them votes? 9. Those who cut short the arguments in favor of democracy by saying that it has been tried and found wanting would do well to consider whether the governments they refer to really were democratic ones, whether a true democracy has ever been known, whether such a thing can be found even now. Of arrangements simulating it, the world has seen not a few, but that democracy itself has ever existed, that is, for a sufficient length of time to admit of its fruits being judged, or that it was possible for it so to have existed during the past condition of humanity, is denied. A return to definitions settles the matter at once. A democracy, properly so called, is a political organization modeled in accordance with the law of equal freedom. And if so, those cannot be called democracies under which, as under the Greek and Roman governments, from 4/5 to 11/12 of the people were slaves. Neither can those be called democracies which, like the constitutions of medieval Italy, conferred power on the burghers and nobles only. Nor can those even be called democracies which, like the Swiss states, have always treated a certain unincorporated class as political outlaws. Enlarged aristocracies these should be termed, not democracies. No matter whether they be a minority or a majority to whom power is denied, the exclusion of them is in spirit the same, and the definition of a democracy is equally broken. The man who steals a penny we call dishonest, as well as the man who steals a pound, and we do so because his act equally testifies to a certain defect of character. Similarly, we must consider a government aristocratic, be the class it excludes large or small. They, however, make the strangest mistake who, referring as they commonly do to the United States, urge the existence of slavery as itself an argument against democracy. Put in a definite form, this would aptly serve the logician as a specimen absurdity. A pseudo-democracy is found not democratic enough, and it is therefore inferred that democracy is a bad thing. Whilst some Autolycus is eulogizing honesty and quoting himself as a sample of it, he is detected in the act of picking his neighbor's pocket, whereupon it is argued that honesty ought forthwith to be repudiated. With his mouth full of noble sentiments and leading a seemingly moral life, a Joseph Surface deceives his friends, and on its being discovered that he is a villain, there arises the exclamation, "What a shocking thing is this morality!" But passing over what might further be said concerning the alleged failure of democracies, let it be granted that they have failed. Let it be granted that there have from time to time been forms of government approaching to the democratic, nay, that in the course of revolutions the thing itself has had a transient existence. Let all this be granted, it still proves nothing. For which is it amongst the endeavors of man that does not at first fail? Is not perseverance through a series of defeats the natural history of success? Does not the process we pass through in learning to walk afford us a type of all human experiences? Though we see a child make hundreds of bootless attempts to maintain its balance, we do not conclude that it is doomed to remain forever upon all fours. Nor do we, in the conduct of its education, cease telling it to try again, because it has many times fallen short of a desired achievement. Doubtless it would be unwise to base an argument upon the assumed analogy between the growth of the individual and of the state. Though both being governed by the same laws of human development, there is probably a genuine analogy between them. But the simile may fairly be employed to hint that the failure of past efforts made by society to preserve the erect attitude of democracy by no means shows that such attitude is not the proper one. And in fact, our theory anticipates such failures. We have already seen that a high form of government is rendered practicable only by a high type of character, that freedom can increase only as fast as control becomes needless, that the perfect man alone can realize the perfect state. A democracy, therefore, being the highest form that a government can assume, indicative, if not of the ultimate phase of civilization, still of the penultimate one, must of necessity fail in the hands of barbarous and semi-barbarous men. Whilst, then, it is maintained that nearly all these alleged failures of democracy are not failures of democracy at all, but of something else, it is argued that the fact of those comparatively genuine democracies set up during revolutions lapsing rapidly back into pre-existing arrangements is in no wise at variance with our position. 10. Whether in any given case a democracy is practicable is a question that will always find its own solution. The physiologist shows us that in an animal organism, the soft parts determine the forms of the hard ones, and it is equally true that in the social organism, the seemingly fixed framework of laws and institutions is molded by the seemingly forceless thing, character. Social arrangements are the bones to that body of which the national morality is the life, and they will grow into free, healthy shapes or into sickly and cramped ones, according as that morality, that life, is vigorous or otherwise. The vital principle of society we have seen to be the law of equal freedom, and we have further seen that in the compound faculty originating a moral sense there exists an agent enabling men to appreciate, to love, and to act up to this law. Chapters 4 and 5. We have seen that to realize the divine idea, greatest happiness, the human constitution must be such as that each man confining himself within his own sphere of activity shall leave intact the similar spheres of activity of others. Chapter 3. And we have further seen that an instinct of our own freedom and a sympathy which makes us respect the like freedom of our fellows compose a mechanism capable of establishing this state of things. If these feelings are undeveloped, a people's beliefs, laws, customs, and manners will be aggressive in their character. Let them act with due force, and the organization of the community, equally with the conduct of its members, will be in harmony with the social law. Political forms indicate the degree of efficiency with which this mental mechanism works, are in a manner supplementary to such mechanism, are bad and coercive if it is defective, become ameliorated in proportion as it acts well. And thus democracy, as one of the higher social forms, is of necessity identified both in origin and practicability with a dominant moral sense. This fact has been already more than once hinted, but it will be desirable now to examine more attentively than heretofore the grounds on which it is alleged. Observe first, then, that in the earlier stages of civilization, before the process of adaptation has yet produced much effect, the desire for political equality does not exist. There were no agitations for representative government amongst the Egyptians, or the Persians, or the Assyrians. With them all disputes were as to who should be tyrant. By the Hindus, a similar state of things is exhibited to the present hour. The Russians, too, are still under this phase, and in their utter carelessness of civil liberty, shun anyone who preaches justice and condemns tyranny as a perverse malcontent. The like mental condition was shown during the earlier stages of our own progress. In the Middle Ages, fealty to a feudal lord was accounted a duty, and the assertion of personal freedom a crime. Rights of man were not then dreamed of. Revolutions were nothing but dynastic quarrels, not what they have been in later times, attempts to make government more popular. And if, after glancing at the changes that have taken place between the far past and the present, we reflect upon the character of modern ideas and agitations, on declarations of rights, liberty of the press, slave emancipation, removal of religious disabilities, reform bills, Chartism, etc., and consider how through all of them there runs a kindred spirit, and how this spirit is manifesting itself with constantly increasing intensity and universality, we shall see that these facts imply some moral change. And explicable as they are by the growth of this compound faculty responding to the law of equal freedom, it is reasonable to consider them as showing the mode in which such faculty seeks to place social arrangements in harmony with that law, or in other words, as illustrating the efforts of the moral sense to realize the democratic state. If a democracy is produced by this agency, so also is it rendered practicable by it. The popular form of government, as contrasted with the monarchical, is professedly one which places less restraint upon the individual. In speaking of it, we use such terms as free institutions, civil liberty, self-government, all implying this. But the diminution of external restraint can take place only at the same rate as the increase of internal restraint. Conduct has to be ruled either from without or from within. If the rule from within is not efficient, there must exist a supplementary rule from without. If, on the other hand, all men are properly ruled from within, government becomes needless and all men are perfectly free. Now, the chief faculty of self-rule being the moral sense, Chapter 5, the degree of freedom in their institutions which any given people can bear will be proportionate to the diffusion of this moral sense amongst them, and only when its influence greatly predominates can so large an installment of freedom as a democracy become possible. Lastly, the supremacy of this same faculty affords the only guarantee for the stability of a democracy. On the part of the people, it gives rise to what we call a jealousy of their liberties, a watchful determination to resist anything like encroachment upon their rights, whilst it generates amongst those in power such a respect for these rights as checks any desire they may have to aggress. Conversely, let the ruled be deficient in the instinct of freedom, and they will be indifferent to the gradual usurpation of their privileges so long as it entails no immediate inconvenience upon them. and the rulers in such case, being deficient in sympathetic regard for these privileges, will be to a like extent unscrupulous in usurping. Let us observe in detail the different modes in which men thus contradistinguished comport themselves under a representative form of government. Amongst a people not yet fitted for such a form, citizens lacking the impulse to claim equal power with each other become careless in the exercise of their franchise, doubt whether it is of any use to them, and even pride themselves on not interfering in public affairs. Provided their liberties are but indirectly affected, they will watch the passing of the most insidious measures with vacant unconcern. It is only barefaced aggressions that they can perceive to be aggressions at all. Placing as they do but little value upon their privileges, they are readily bribed. When threatened, instead of assuming that attitude of dogged resistance which the instinct of freedom dictates, they truckle. If tricked out of a right of citizenship, they are quite indifferent about getting it again, and indeed, when the exercise of it conflicts with any immediate interest, are glad to give it up, will even petition, as in times past did many of the corporate towns, both in England and Spain, that they may be excused from electing representatives. Meanwhile, in accordance with that law of social homogeneity lately dwelt upon, those in authority are in a like ratio ready to encroach. They intimidate, they bribe, they plot, and by degrees establish a comparatively coercive government. On the other hand, amongst a people sufficiently endowed with the faculty responding to the law of equal freedom, no such retrograde process is possible. The man of genuinely democratic feeling loves liberty as a miser loves gold, for its own sake and quite irrespective of its advantages. Page 95. What he thus highly values, he sleeplessly watches. He quickly detects any attempt at diminution of it, and he opposes aggression the moment it commences. Should any assume undue prerogatives, he straightway steps up to them and demands their authority for so doing. Transactions that seem in the remotest degree underhand awaken his suspicions, which are not to be laid so long as anything remains unexplained. He scents out an abuse with instinctive sagacity, and having found one, never rests until it is abolished. If in any proposed arrangement there be a latent danger to the liberties of himself and others, any germ of irresponsible power, he instantly discovers it and refuses his consent. He is alarmed by such a proposal as the disfranchisement of a constituency by the legislature, for it at once occurs to him that the measure thus leveled against one may be leveled against many. To call that responsible government under which a cabinet minister can entangle the nation in a quarrel about some paltry territory before they know anything of it, he sees to be absurd. It needs no chain of reasoning to show him that the assumption by a delegated assembly of the power to lengthen its own existence from 3 years to 7 is an infraction of the representative principle. He feels that it is so, and no plausible professions of patriotism, no boasting of honorable intentions can check his opposition to the setting up of so dangerous a precedent. Still more excited is he when applied to for grants of public money, with the understanding that on a future occasion he shall be told how they have been spent. Flimsy excuses about exigencies of the state and the like cannot entrap him into so glaring an act of self-stultification. He listens to them frowningly, and maintaining as he does that the protection of men's rights is the chief, or rather the sole exigency of the state, sternly negatives the request. Thus is he ever on the watch to extirpate incipient oppression. to nip abuses in the bud, or if such an expression is allowable, to stop encroachment before it begins. And when a community consists of men animated by the spirit thus exemplified, the continuance of liberal institutions is certain. Political freedom, therefore, is, as we say, an external result of an internal sentiment, is alike in origin, practicability, and permanence dependent on the moral sense, and it is only when this is supreme in its influence that so high a form of social organization as a democracy can be maintained. 11. And thus we arrive at the true answer to that question at present so widely agitated. Is a purely popular form of government practicable now? For as the sentiment by which a state of perfect political liberty is generated is also the one by which it is upheld, there immediately suggests itself the corollary that when the sentiment is strong enough to generate it, it is strong enough to uphold it. Whenever, therefore, a people calmly arrives at the conclusion that democratic institutions are right, whenever they dispassionately determine that they shall be adopted, or in other words, whenever the circumstances show that the setting up of such institutions is not an accident, but results from the ascendancy of the aforesaid sentiment, then and then alone are such institutions permanently possible. In the opinion, now happily so prevalent, that the pacific mode of working out political changes is the only efficient one, we have a collateral expression of this truth. Men see that freedom achieved by the sword is uniformly lost again, but that it is lasting when gained by peaceful agitation. Hence they very properly infer the propriety of carrying reform solely by means which the moral law recognizes, means which do not involve violations of it. Right as this conclusion may be, however, it is not philosophically understood. Men do not see why the thing is so. There is no truth in the usual supposition that the loss of liberties obtained by violence is a kind of retribution. It is not that bloodshed vitiates the free institutions it may help to set up, nor is it that when peacefully established, such institutions are preserved by virtue of their being so established, but it is that the manner in which the change is wrought indicates the national character and proves it to be respectively unfit or fit for the new social form. A brief examination of the moral conditions implied by these different kinds of revolution will show this. When an old regime is overthrown by force, no guarantee is given that the new one put in its place will satisfy the wants of the age. The occurrence is simply a demonstration that the miseries inflicted under this old regime were no longer bearable. To repeat the saying of Sully, quoted by Burke, and which is perfectly true when applied to convulsions of this nature, it is never from the desire to attack that the people rise, but from impatience under suffering. Now, anger against an agent inflicting pain is a passion exhibited by brutes as well as by men, and a social revolution wrought out by such a motive power is not likely to leave behind it a state of things specially adapted to the people's circumstances. That sudden display of ill temper with which a man dashes on the ground something that has given him much provocation, and yet the loss of which he will subsequently regret, serves in some measure to illustrate the conduct of a people thus excited. They are irritated, and justly so. The hold which authority has had over them is weakened. That sentiment of power worship, that loyalty, as we term it, which was but the index of a certain adaptation between their characters and the rule they had lived under, is for the time being in abeyance, is silenced, drowned in the rising tide of their wrath. And when, after they have destroyed the old framework of things, another becomes needful, it is very improbable that the one set up during this temporary state of excitement will be one really in harmony with their natural characters. Nay, indeed, it is sure to be out of harmony with their natural characters, for consider the institutions they set up will bear the impress of the feeling then prevalent, a feeling widely different from that previously exhibited, and also from that which will come uppermost again by and by. Stimulated by transpiring events, the germs of those sentiments destined someday to establish genuine political freedom assume a precocious activity, seem much stronger and more general than they really are, whilst on the contrary, those sentiments which upheld the preceding state of things are almost wholly dormant. The improvised form of government exactly answers to this exceptional condition of mind, and might work could that condition be maintained. But as fast as the popular feeling ebbs back into its ordinary channels, so fast does the incongruity between the new arrangements and the old character make itself felt, and so fast is the retrogression. On viewing the facts through the foregoing theory of moral sense agency, it becomes still more manifest that free institutions obtained by violence are of necessity premature. For what are the requisite antecedents to one of these social convulsions? They are the torments of a widespread and deep-seated injustice. And of what character is this injustice the exponent? Evidently a character deficient in those sentiments which deter men from aggression, a character in which the faculties of the social man are as yet imperfectly developed, a character, that is, by which the law of equal freedom is not duly responded to. Hence the unscrupulous trespasses on the one part, and the culpable submission on the other, which by their accumulated results have induced so terrible a crisis. Well, though by a revolution the people may remake their government, they cannot remake themselves. Slightly changed, perhaps, they may be in the passing through a period of such fiery excitement, but in the main they are still the men they were. The old process will consequently repeat itself. The storm of passion having died away, there will again begin these encroachments and this indifference, and they will continue until, by a gradual imposition of fresh bonds, the nation has been reduced, not indeed to a condition as bad as before, but to a condition not greatly in advance of it. Of political amelioration specifically wrought out, exactly the opposite is predictable. These appertain to a higher phase of civilization. In the first place, they presuppose the popular suffering to be of a comparatively mild type, no longer unbearable, maddening, and other things equal, this indicates a diminished amount of injustice, and a diminished amount of injustice implies a more prevalent and energetic moral sense. Thus the very antecedents of a peaceful agitation serve in some measure to ensure the success of the free institutions obtained by it. But it is in the process by which one of these bloodless revolutions is brought about that the existence of the needful popular character is most clearly evinced. For in what consists the vitality of such a movement? What is the secret power that originates it, to which its growth is due, and by the help of which it triumphs? Manifestly this feeling that responds to the law of equal freedom. These pertinacious demands for political equality are simply the signs of its increasing activity, not hunger, nor the anxiety to escape from torture, nor the desire for vengeance is now the transforming force, but a calm, unswerving determination to get human liberties recognized. The carrying out one of these battles of opinion to a successful issue through long delays and discouragements through ridicule and misrepresentation implies a perennial source of energy quite different from mere insurrectionary rage. In place of a passing gust of anger, a persistent and ever-strengthening sentiment is here the acting agent. Agitation is its gymnasium. Men in whom it predominates cultivate it in the rest. They address it in speeches, they write articles to it, they convene meetings for its manifestation. It is aroused by denunciations of injustice. It is appealed to in the name of conscience. It is conjured by all that is fair and upright and equitable. Pictures of the slave and the tyrant are exhibited to excite its abhorrence. A state of pure freedom is described to it as the one to be loved and hoped for. And it is made sensible of the sacredness of human rights. After men's minds have been for many years thus exercised and stimulated, a sufficiently intense manifestation of feeling is produced, and then comes the reform. But this feeling mark proceeds from that same combination of faculties by which, as we have seen, free institutions are upheld and made practicable. One of these agitations, therefore, is a kind of apprenticeship to the liberties obtained by it. The power to get freedom becomes the measure of the power to use it. The law of social forms is that they shall be expressive of national character. They come into existence bearing its impress, and they live only so long as it supplies them with vitality. Now, a general dissatisfaction with old arrangements is a sign that the national character requires better ones, and for the people in pursuit of these better ones to have organized associations, maintained lecturers, and for session after session to have wearied the legislature with petitions, to have continued this too until the accumulated force of opinion has become irresistible, is to have given conclusive proof that the change brought about is really in harmony with the wants of the age. The new institutions do not now express an exceptional state of the popular mind, but express its habitual state, and hence are certain to be fitted to it. 12. Here then is encouragement for timid reformers. Men of true insight need none of these detailed considerations to steady their convictions by. The mathematician does not call for a pair of compasses to test a proved theorem with, nor does the man of healthy faith wait for more evidence after he hears what the moral law says. It is enough for him that a thing is right. He will never believe that the carrying out of what is right by right means can be injurious, and this is the only spirit worthy to be named religious. But as unhappily the many are not endowed with so trusting a belief, it is requisite to back the dictates of equity with supplementary arguments. The moral infidelity of the expediency school requires meeting, and it is to those infected by it that the above considerations are commended, as showing that they need not fear to exhibit whatever sympathy with democratic principles they possess, need not fear to throw their energies at once into the popular cause, for that when equitable institutions are equitably obtained, they must necessarily prosper. 13. Thus the claim deducible from the law of equal freedom, the claim possessed by each citizen to like political power with the rest, is not counterbalanced by any of those prudential considerations commonly urged against it. We find that so long as selfishness makes government needful at all, it must make every government corrupt, save one in which all men are represented. The assertion that conceding universal suffrage would be creating a comparatively immoral constituency proves to be quite unwarrantable. seeing that all classes are immoral, and when numbers and circumstances are taken into account apparently in an equal degree. A glance at the evidence shows that popular ignorance also is a two-edged objection, for in the knowledge which may be supposed needful for the right use of votes, the mass of those inside the pale of the Constitution are about as deficient as those outside of it. The argument that purely representative institutions have been tried and have failed is not only based upon inapplicable instances, but would prove nothing if substantiated. Lastly, in this, as in other cases, it turns out that the possibility of fulfilling the injunctions of the moral law is proportionate to the advance men have made towards the moral state, political arrangements inevitably adjusting themselves to the popular character, so that whilst we may say to the ardent Democrats, be sure that a democracy will be attained whenever the people are good enough for one, we may on the other hand say to those of little faith, fear not that a democracy, when peacefully attained, can be attained too soon. End of chapter 20, part 2.